Hello, I'm Dan, and today I'm going to run you through my strip down and maintenance routine for my 22 LR competition rifle. I run the Calibre Innovations M22. It's a mil-spec gun, so will be similar or identical to the strip down on most AR platforms. I just thought this would be useful for any beginners to the sport, anyone that might be just getting their AR for the first time and interested to know how it strips down, what the parts are that are involved, and what areas I personally recommend for maintaining and cleaning. Everyone's opinion and sort of routine will differ, but if this just gives you an idea, points you in the right direction, then that's great. So we've got a few bits and pieces. So we have some gun oil, most important. We've got a dirty rag. We've got an oily rag. We have some brushes. We've got some cotton earbuds, which I'll show you what they're for shortly, and some grips or some tweezers, useful for helping us get the firing pin out again, that you'll see shortly. So before we begin, safety. I've obviously done this already, but just to confirm, we prove clear with the rifle, so we have no round in the chamber, obviously got no magazine in, so we are all safe and good to begin. Now, an AR is built to strip down incredibly easily. One of the easiest rifles that are out there. It's built to be field strippable, really quick, easy for cleaning, easy for maintaining. We have two takedown pins that we can see, one at the front and one at the rear. So they are simply pushed through from the other side of the rifle and then pulled out on this side here. And immediately the lower and upper receivers will split apart. Now we're going to begin with the lower, so I'm just going to move our upper out of the way. Now our lower receiver consists of a couple of items. So essentially we have the takedown pins, we have our trigger assembly. Now my competition gun runs an upgraded one-piece unit CMC trigger. However, most ARs will have the standard trigger and sear mechanism in there. Regardless of which trigger you're running, the cleaning and maintenance routines that I'm going to show you are all very similar. So that's where we're going to start. And this is where we have the cotton buds for. Because one of the issues that we get with the trigger mechanisms is we get sort of grit and residue from the 22LR rounds, and it starts to gum up this mechanism. You'll hear it when you're actually cocking the trigger back and forward. You'll hear almost like a little gritty grinding sound, and that's because of all this this sort of residue from the gunpowder that comes out. So all we do, or all I do, is slide our cotton earbuds down into the springs, into the bottom of the mechanism, all around the sear and the hammer, and just essentially get out as much of that grit as is possible. And you'll see straight away the ends of your cotton buds come out black, which is what we want, because we want it on the end of there being pulled out from the gun rather than being left in there. So we give it a good clean, making sure we get as much out as possible. And that's our trigger mechanism sorted. Next thing we do, I'm just going to cock the hammer. At the front of the rifle, you will see you have a bolt release mechanism. My gun runs a better mag adapter because I run the Smith and Western magazines. However, regardless of whether you've got this or not, you should see the bolt release. That bolt release again can get quite gritty, so I just tend to wipe around it with a cotton bud and then just give it a good wipe down with my my rag, and just make sure that mechanism moves nice and smoothly. We also have the fire selector. Now I won't do this every time, but you know, every 5 or 6 shoots I will just give that a full clean, and obviously just make sure that that is a drop of oil as well. I did that on my last shoot, So I won't be doing anything further other than checking that the mechanism is tight, none of the screws have come loose, and just giving it a quick check over. So the last two things I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a drop of oil onto the takedown pins just to make sure they continue to operate nice and smoothly, and also a drop of oil onto the actual trigger springs. Again, a very light amount. Now, one thing to note, if you're the type of person that isn't going to touch your gun again for another 12 months, putting oil on some of these areas can actually be detrimental because it will attract grit and dust, and you'll end up causing premature wear. However, for someone like myself who's going to maintain his gun after every shoot, or after every 1, 2 or 3 shoots at the very most, it's not a problem because it'll be getting cleaned and reeled every time. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tiniest drop of oil and just put 1 drop on each takedown pin, and it literally doesn't need much. And I'm just going to put 1 drop on the main hammer spring, and I'm just going to release that hammer very gently, and I'm going to put 1 drop on the sear spring as well. There we go. I will take a cotton bud just for the trigger springs because I can't get into them with my oily rag, and I'm just going to spread that oil around those springs and those moving mechanisms, and just cycle the hammer a couple of times just to work that oil in. Then I'll take my oily rag and I'm just going to wipe that oil around those takedown pins. Now all we're essentially doing is leaving it with the lightest coat of oil, really light. Shouldn't be thick. You shouldn't actually be able to tell that it's wet. It's just a light coat of oil to protect and to lubricate. And that is our lower receiver finished. So we're going to swap these over now. Pop the lower to one side. Next up is our upper. So this is where our bolt assembly sits. It's where our bolt extractor is at the back, and our charging handle, and everything else that is part of the actual firing mechanism for the rifle. So what we do is we take the charging handle at the rear and we pull it out. And as we pull it out, keep your hand there, because as we go out, the bolt will release as well. So what we will do is we will slide the bolt out of the gun, pop it to one side, and then the actual charging handle itself will pull all the way back to the back, and then we'll pull down and it will slide out of its notch and come out of the gun. So I'm going to pop the bolt and the charging handle to one side, and we're just going to focus on the upper receiver first. Now, within the upper, there are a couple of different channels. So right at the top, at the very top of the gun, is the channel where the charging handle runs in. And then just below that is a channel where the actual bolt slides in itself. And what we want to do, same as we've just done with the trigger unit, is just try and get as much of that residue and grit out as possible. So I've got a gentle brush, and all I'm going to do is run that into those little areas, into those channels where the bolt and that charging handle run. And I'm just going to make sure I pull all of that grit out as possible and get that all nice and clean as we can. We also have the end of the barrel that's just showing through, that as we can see there. So again, just take that brush and just make sure we get any residue, gunpowder residue or anything else off that area, and make sure it's nice and clean. Again, I like to take a cotton bud because I can get that right in the channel at the bottom and just run that along, and it just makes sure that I'm not leaving any grit or any gunk in there. Now, as I say, I maintain my gun after every shoot, so I don't actually get a huge build-up. If you're doing this after 5 or 6 shoots, you'll have to spend a little bit more time because you can have a bit more of a build-up of grit and gunk in there, basically. So once that's all cleaned out, that is our upper sorted. So we'll drop that out the way for a second. And now we're just going to focus on our charging handle and our bolt, which is the main area we need to ensure is nice and clean. So we'll leave our charging handle to the side. So now we have our bolt. So this is a CMMG bolt that I'm specifically looking at and using here. almost all ARs will run on similar, or certainly a similar 22LR ARs, I should say, will run on similar. So to disassemble the bolt, what we do is we have a centre section that runs back on a spring-loaded rail that you can see there. So what we do is we pull that all the way to the back, like so, and we place our finger at the back and on there, which just keeps that spring tensioned and right at the back itself. And then what we can see at the front is we can see the front part of the bolt, and we see this rail that the bolt runs on. That rail can actually be pushed apart, as you can see there. And if I push it apart, the front of the bolt will just simply drop out, move that to one side, and then I can gently slide the rest of the bolt off the rail, off the spring guide, and there we have it. So we have the centre part of the bolt, we have the front, we have our spring guide, and we have the rail itself. Now with the centre part of the bolt, you'll see at the back we have the part where the back of the firing pin, where the hammer strikes. That is spring loaded, so that should be nice and spongy, as we can see there. We have the retainer pin that holds in the firing pin itself, and then we have the front of the bolt face where you can just see that firing pin pushing out as the hammer strikes at the rear. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take our little tweezers or pliers, and I'm just going to pop that retaining pin out from the side. There we go, and just pop that down, and that will then allow the firing pin and spring to slide out from the back. And that is everything apart. Now we can get on to cleaning. So I'm just going to move that upper out of the way a little bit. So the first thing I like to do is to take the rail itself, because this is the thing that essentially the centre part of that bolt slides on when you're pulling it back, taking it apart, and when it's cycling around. So the first thing I will do is I'll take my dirty rag, and I'm just going to completely clean that down. Make sure that there is no residue left on it. If there is, I'll take one of my brushes and just give it a thorough clean. Make sure there's absolutely no residue left on any parts of that rail, and it's nice and clean as it should be. Okie dokie, so we'll just pop that to one side for the moment. Next we'll take the front of the bolt. Now, as I say, I maintain this gun quite regular, so it's quite clean as it is. But essentially, we've got the front face that mates up with the centre section of the bolt, and we have this this feed lip that essentially just helps the round forward into the opening to the barrel. All of that should be incredibly clean and gets a lot of stubborn gunpowder residue on there. So I just like to take a stiff brush, not a steel one or anything that's going to scratch the surface, but just a nice stiff brush, and just run that along there and clean as much of that residue off via the brush and via your sort of cleaning rag that we've got there. And what we're looking for is a nice shiny feed lip and a nice clean face. Next up we have the firing pin. Now what I like to do here is just inspect the end of the firing pin, just make sure it doesn't look damaged. If there's any residue or gunk or anything like that on the end of it, give it a good clean off, and that tip should look nice and shiny. It's not damaged, doesn't look like it's about to fail. Give the actual body of the firing pin a wipe down, because that's the bit that's got to slide inside the actual bolt itself, and we want that nice and smooth, and that's all clean and ready. Same with the actual spring unit that goes back. Again, just give it a clean down. They don't tend to get too dirty, to be honest, but you just want to prevent any build-up or any chance that it might snap. And again, just give it a quick inspection, make sure there's no breaks or anything that needs addressing. Okay, so that firing pin and everything is ready to go back together now. So the first thing I will do is I will apply a drop of oil on the actual firing pin spring. and give it a wipe with an oily rag, and that just ensures that that spring is going to continue functioning. They are a wearable part. You will find firing pin springs do snap. I like to change mine probably every 100 runs or so, every 100 competitions. Just ensures it stays running smoothly. Some people actually run them without firing pin springs. That's all personal preference. I just find a little bit of maintenance, a drop of oil helps. So that drops straight back in to the end of the firing pin chamber. And then we take the firing pin itself. Again, all I like to do is the tiniest drop of oil on the body. Tiny drop. Again, because I'm cleaning this and doing this almost every run, maybe every 2 at most, I'm not worried about this sort of building up grit and wearing down the inside of the body or the firing pin. And then I'll just drop that into the body with the notch facing up, because that's where the split pin is going to go in a second. So I just slide that in, and then I take my split pin and we'll just slide that into the split pin hole. There we go. And essentially just push that in, and that will go in on the retainer. If I held it in correctly. I think the firing pin has actually just rotated slightly, unfortunately, so we'll just pull that back out. As I say, you've got to keep that notch right at the top. Just push that right in, keep that notch at the top, and then slide that retaining pin into the hole. It's a lot easier when you're trying to do this when you're not videoing. I can tell you that for nothing. Obviously not got something lined up correctly there. Nope, the firing pin has rotated round slightly. There we go. Try one last time. This is where you need those videos where someone goes, and here's one I prepared earlier. There we go. So the retaining pin slides in, and you can always just check that everything's okay, because at the rear of the firing pin, that should be nice and springy, so that the hammer strikes the back of the firing pin and then releases back out. There we go. So now we're ready to pop everything else back together again. So this is a stage where obviously we need to make sure it's all cleaned and a couple of dabs of oil. So I start with the rail. What I will do is I'll take my gun oil and I will literally just put a couple of drops, the tiniest little drops, one on the front, one on the middle, and one on the rear. And then I will take my oily rag and just wipe that all over this rail, making sure I get in between where the actual rail itself is going to slide, and making sure all of this is nice and clean. There's no big thick film of oil, it's just a really nice light coating. Same at the back, and there we have it. Now once that is done, I'm going to take the front piece, and again exactly the same. I'm just going to put one drop on the side and just wipe the whole thing down with oil. The smallest little coating. That one done. You can see that's nice, shiny and coated. The actual main body of the bolt itself, I'll give a quick wipe down once it's all reassembled. So now, excuse me, we can take the rail and the guide pin at the back of the main spring and pop that in. We then take the bolt itself, feed the spring into the channel on the top, and on the actual bolt itself there's sort of guides on the side. You'll see that that slides into, and that will slide all the way back down to the bottom, and again you can just use your thumb and finger to hold that in place. And then what we do on the top, try and just show this for the camera, is the feed ramp goes at the bottom. There we go. And what I like to do is take one of the sides, so say this side, and put that into the rail, into the slot where that goes on the side. So that leaves the other side not quite in yet, but the one side is. And then I take my fingers and separate the rail until it drops into place. There you go, it locks into place properly. Now I can slowly release that bolt and you will see that that is all back together nicely. As I mentioned before, I will give this a quick oil. One thing I should have said while it was apart as well that I like to check is on the side of that centre section of the bolt, you should just be able to see, is the extractor. Now that extractor should move in and out. Let me just see if I've got something to show you nice and easy. That extractor, which is just there, that should move in and out nice and easy. I'm not going to do it because these are metal and it will scratch, but you should just be able to pull it outwards nice and gently. Now that actually runs on a pin that you can see here, and that can be popped out from the bottom and pop the extractor out. I would give it a clean every 10 or 20 shoots or so. Doesn't need it every single time. I just check that that is moving nice and smoothly, which it is, so I'm happy with that. Again, I will pop one drop of oil just on the side, a tiniest little drop, and then I'll take my oily rag and I will just wipe it over that entire bolt, top and bottom, and just make sure all of that has a nice light coating of oil, and that is the bolt complete. Now before we pop it back in the gun, we will take our charging handle. Now this runs, as I say, in a channel in the upper receiver, so again we've got contact, so we just want to make sure that this is completely clean. So we'll give it a wipe down, full wipe down with our rag, make sure we've got all residue off there, it's nice and clean. And then I will take one drop of oil again, pop it onto the top of the charging handle, take our oily rag and just rub that into the top, to the sides, basically to all those areas where it's going to be contacting with the upper receiver. Now the ends of the charging handle will likely be pre-oiled or greased from the factory because they do pop open where they lock into the side of the receiver, so just check that that whole mechanism is moving smoothly, and it is, so that doesn't need any further oiling. So now we're ready to pop these back together. So what we do is we take our upper receiver, just pop that upside down like that. We take our charging handle with the notch facing upwards or downwards on the receiver, and what we do is we insert it into the back of the gun about an inch or so in, and then we push down, and you'll see that around about that point, about an inch or so in, it will drop into the channel. There you go, so it drops into the bottom channel of the gun, and at that point we can slide that all the way in. Now we don't want it all the way in because we've got to slide our bolt in, so we'll just leave it part way out. Then we take our bolt with the front section that's got the feed lip inside facing the front of the gun, and that spring guided rail as well, it goes towards the top or the bottom as I'm holding it upside down. And all we do is we pop that into the channel, and you'll feel the channel straight away, and then you can slide that all the way into the gun. The charging handle will go with it, and you can just push it until it locks in place. Charging handle then will lock into the receiver, and that is our bolt nicely in. We'll check that it cycles okay in a second when we put it back together with the lower, but that is our maintenance on the upper receiver. Every several hundred rounds or so, if you're running any sort of flash hider or cover at the end, just make sure that that's clean, it's not getting glunked up with residue and anything else. And then essentially this is ready now to take our lower receiver. I like to pop the front takedown pins back on first. To be honest, it doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but I'm going to pop the front on first and just slide takedown pin into place so that it locks on. And then essentially I can just literally fold the rear back into place, make sure that rear takedown pin is out in full, slide that in, lock it into place, and there is our cleaned and maintained 22LR AR. I can cycle the bolts a couple of times, and that mechanism is beautiful and smooth, ready for my next competition. Thanks for watching. If you've got any comments or questions, please pop them below in the video and I'll be more than happy to answer them. Brilliant. Thanks everyone. Take care. Bye bye.